Hello, YouTubers. This is Atilla Yeşilada presenting for Real Turkey channel from Istanbul, and today is Monday. Today I want to talk about the reconversion of Hagia Sophia into a mosque. It used to be a museum. It was ordained to become a museum by the founder of Turkish Republic, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. Its reconversion has created massive reverberations across the world. Obviously, Orthodox Christians are extremely angry. But I am more interested in the political implications and whether this is a symbolic act or whether it says something about the future of Turkey. If you follow Turkey, you must have read at least 10 articles about the import of Hagia Sophia's reconversion. Some scholars, and I respect these people very much, I read them religiously, claim that secularism in Turkey is dead. Others claim President Erdogan took this step to prove that he is the undisputable master of Turkish politics and can do whatever he wants to do. At home, and I'm talking about not the lunatic fringe, but people who have scholar credentials, serious, earnest people, claiming Mr. Erdogan would soon declare himself caliph, which is the equivalent in the Sunni Muslim world of Pope, as far as Catholics go, the ultimate arbitrator of all religious disputes, and the person who is somehow authorized to speak on behalf of the Creator to the brethren. I laughed all of these simply because I have several surveys showing that the people of Turkey don't care one way or other. And the whole story will be forgotten in a week or so. Let me show you a picture of Hagia Sophia. What a magnificent cathedral this is. And it is just a world heritage piece of architecture. And I don't mind if Orthodox Christians or Muslims pray there, but essentially it should be preserved as a museum, if you care about my personal opinion. But symbolic or not, it has no meaning for Turkey's future voting patterns or Mr. Erdogan's strength in terms of politics. And I say so with the backing of several polls, all of which found Turkish people either think it's a ploy to distract attention from the massive economic distress and rising poverty that we're going through, or it is a highly symbolic act to make sure Mr. Erdogan's core Islamist constituency doesn't migrate to two new alternative parties founded by former AKP frontbenchers, namely DEVA, the Solution Party, by Mr. Ali Babacan, who used to be our economy czar, and the Gelecek, or Future Party, by former Prime Minister Mr. Ahmet Davutoğlu. These parties are very new. Both are less than 6 months old. I'm talking about the formal establishment date. And according to my average of polls, together the two parties already garner 4% of the national vote, which you may think is completely irrelevant. But given the very fine balance between the governing coalition, the Republican coalition of AKP and MHP, and the opposing alliance of the Nation Alliance, 4% make a huge difference, in particular if most of that 4% comes from AKP. Even if these two parties will not or were not to increase their votes until the next elections, a swing of 4% from AKP, MHP camp to the other camp could change the control of the parliament from AKP-MHP to the current minority, the opposition alliance. So Mr. Erdogan is extremely worried, even though these two parties are shut out from the mainstream media, which is tightly controlled by AKP. Both of them have used the social media adroitly. Their conversations or speeches command huge amounts of traffic, up to millions, and they are making a name for themselves. And essentially, what they propose is a better AKP, a more democratic, with better and more orthodox economic management, and more importantly, friendlier to the West rather than being antagonistic. So they present an alternative to AKP, and if the current economic distress doesn't end soon, by the end of the summer or by midwinter, I expect these two parties to raise their share of the national vote, and this significantly frightens Mr. Erdogan. So he has developed this two-pillar strategy of keeping his constituency at home and making sure the national alliance doesn't rise further. Reconversion of Hagia Sophia is symbolic and important only in that sense. My apologies. It shows to AKP's core voters, which are, fundamentalist Islamists, but I don't mean fundamentalists in the sense of violent, but truly devout, truly pious Muslims, that Mr. Erdogan is still the true leader of Sunni Muslim. He is the genuine deal. And if they want to see more Islamization or live freely as Muslims, they should keep voting for Mr. Erdogan. The second pillar of the strategy is to make sure that the national or nation alliance doesn't grab more media space, doesn't share its views with the society. AKP has a firm control over the mainstream media. Almost all of the mainstream media owners are either AKP cronies or companies that receive huge amounts of public tender business from AKP. So they only publish pro-AKP views. But social media is relatively free. It's wild, uncontrolled, and full of false news, I accept. But hey, you can't throw the baby with the wet bathwater. We can't live without social media. And social media, according to several studies, for instance, for those of you who live in the United States, can check the website of Center for American Progress. It published a study dated June 10 on changing Turkish media habits and why it poses a challenge to Mr. Erdogan. It shows that even AKP and MHP voters don't find the mainstream media credible or reliable, and increasingly, regardless of the age barricade or age cohort, Turks are migrating to social media, not only to make friends and to socialize, but also to get their information, which in the West we get either from TV news channels or from newspapers, which are respectable. But that's not the case in Turkey. So Mr. Erdogan has enabled the legislation of a social media censorship law, which has cleared the parliamentary committees and will soon be up for a general floor vote, and I'm sure it will pass. Its purported aim is to get rid of sexual content and content that's against the Turkish laws out of the social media. But judging by what AKP did in the past, many observers, including I, believe that the true objective is to get dissident views out of social media and turn social media into the back garden of AKP as once the mainstream media was converted. Finally, Mr. Erdogan is also contemplating to pull Turkey out of the Istanbul Protocol. I hope this is the correct expression for the term. It's sort of like the Paris Protocol or Kyoto Protocol, but pan-European. It commits all of the signatories to strive for the gender equality and to prevent abuses to women by their kin or boyfriends, etc., etc. So, it's sort of a women's lib type of agreement, treaty. Why would Mr. Erdogan care to pull out of those? Simply because his core Islamic constituency are also members of tariqat, which is usually translated as sect, but for the Christian audience of this video, the better translation would be church, such as the Catholic Church, the Lutheran Church, the Protestant Church, the Mormon Church, etc., etc. It is an interpretation of the main religion which differs in nuances from other interpretations and which has mosques and developed physical and spiritual structures separate from other churches. Turkey's Sunni sects have been prevaricating in their decision to support AKP because many have realized that its votes are falling. So by pulling, I don't know if he will, by the way. He hasn't really made a comment on that recently, but pulling out of Istanbul Protocol is just another bait thrown in the direction of these tariqats, these Sunni Muslim sects, to keep them in the AKP party. Obviously, that too is a very risky proposal. While pulling out of the Istanbul Protocol may increase the loyalty of the true Islamists or pious voters, it's certainly going to annoy the new urban conservative female, and the social media legislation is certain to annoy Turkey's Y and Z generations. Roughly people at the age bracket of 15 to 30 is how I define Y and Z generations, who live in the social media, more importantly, who consider social media as their main source of education and information. If you deprive them of this privilege, if you restrict their choices, they are more likely than not to migrate away from AKP to other parties which promise full freedom of speech and expression. Analysis of the Z generation, and we have countless surveys about them, shows that they are not apolitical, but they are not engaged in politics, simply watching the parties, simply because they can't find a party that appeals to their priorities and to their objectives. If they stay that way, the voting balance in the next election won't change much. You would assume that if these people vote, they would vote, in a random distribution. But if you annoy them, they could turn out in large numbers in the polls to protest AKP. They could switch to CHP, HDP, as I've said, Mr. Ali Babacan's DEVA and Mr. Ahmet Davutoğlu's future parties, all of which now promise unconditional freedom of speech, freedom of, congregation, and freedom of expression. So these are the true reasons, and let me show Hagia Sophia one more time. I'm just in love with the structure. It should be open to everyone, to all the religions. So this was the reason behind the recent legislation. And I want to answer the question of whether under Erdogan, Turkey has become more Islamist, more religious, more conservative, and has moved away from secularism. The answer is no. In fact, thanks to Erdogan's silly social engineering projects, Turks have become less religious. I have several polls which show that the ratio of atheists and deists, those who don't believe in a religion but in a creator of some kind, have tripled over the last 10 years. I mean, the ratios are still small. Atheists plus deists are something like 6% of the population. But you got to remember, there's a reporting bias. I mean, in Turkey, if a pollster knocks on your door and asks you whether you consume drugs or alcohol every night, you are certain to say, oh, no, no, no, no, I'm a teetotaler. And that's the same thing about atheism. I mean, a lot of people, I believe, simply don't disclose the fact that they have abandoned their religion. They have lost their religion. Um, One of the most outward expressions of Sunni Muslim, which is females wearing headscarves or hijab, it depends on the country how this term is defined, which in my view they're perfectly entitled to do. A person's dress code or mode should be of no interest to the state or other citizens. But that ratio has declined by about 10 percentage points. More importantly, if you ask people of Turkey, and we're not all Turks, there are Kurds, Armenians, Zazas, migrants from all over the world, Greeks still, and some Jews. If you ask them how they define themselves, like 10 years ago, a substantial minority, roughly up to 40%, have defined themselves as Muslim. Now, the number one and two categories are Kemalist, which is Atatürkist, believing in the teachings of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, and then nationalist. And those who define themselves as Democrats are also increasing. I can cite a number of other statistics, such as kids dropping out of school because they were forced to attend a religious school, a parochial school, Imam Hatip it's called. The new generation becoming much more tolerant towards Christians and other Islamic churches like Alawites or Alavis. But honestly, search as I may, I can't find any statistic whatsoever that Turkey is becoming less secular. Once again, I think my compatriots, scholars in the West, are fooled by the mainstream media, which is controlled by AKP, and only shows those displays of Islamic ritualism. But this is not the reality in Turkey. Neither is Mr. Erdogan the undisputed master of Turkey. When people say that, they must have extremely short memories. Remember local elections in 2019, where CHP and its allies swept major cities. Istanbul is of particular focus because in the first Istanbul municipal elections, CHP's candidate, Mr. Ekrem İmamoğlu, won by something like 20,000 votes against the former PM and AKP candidate. Mr. Erdogan and his ally, Mr. Bahçeli, have put massive pressure on the body that decides these matters, the High Election Council, to have the first round of elections annulled, and a new election was called 3 months later. Mr. Ekrem İmamoğlu swept the polls. He won by a 10 percentage point margin. And Mr. Erdogan had to accept the result. So he is still bound by at least some restrictions of democracy. And if he doesn't do what pleases a majority of the nation, he is doomed to lose his position as a president and leader of the country. Symbolic acts like Hagia Sophia, the social media law, and ideas about pulling out of the Istanbul Protocol or Convention may reinforce the loyalty of AKP voters who already are very loyal to AKP. But they create a lot of antagonism in the rest of the society. And for people like us, urban intellectuals and professionals who work in the private sector, who want focus on the combat against COVID-19, and economic misery are also annoyed. I personally don't care about Hagia Sophia. As far as social media goes, I use a VPN and 10 different nicknames. They'll never take my content out. But it seriously offends me as a voter and a citizen of this country that my elected government is wasting time with these frivolous matters that do nothing to improve Turkish development or Turkish economy. So once again, in closing, if you care at all, Hagia Sophia don't mean anything for Turks, and secularism is well and alive, and in fact spreading faster thanks to Mr. Erdogan's silly projects. Thank you very much. That's all I wanted to say today. You have just watched another, well, not live, but canned video cast of Real Turkey channel. As usual, if you like it, share. And we also have a English language news website called PA Turkey. PA Turkey, that's .com. If you want to receive more of that content, you may want to take a look at it. Stay home, stay safe. This is Attila Eşalar saying goodbye from Istanbul.